Hello and welcome to Weird Around Illinois. One subject that we have made kind of oblique references to over the last several sessions is the idea of remote viewing, and particularly the government's involvement in remote viewing. You may recall Lon Strickler even spoke about it a little bit when we interviewed him. And it kind of occurred to me that some people may have no clue what the heck we're talking about. And with that in mind, I wanted to go in depth on remote viewing and our government's involvement in the process of remote viewing. So let's do that, and let's get weird. All right, if you'll bear with me, because I know you two aren't exactly experts on remote viewing, even though you're familiar with it, I'm just going to give you a little history lesson.
Okay.
So sit back, relax, and listen to what was going on in the United States over the last several decades that nobody knew about until just recently. Okay, our story starts in the early 1970s. The U.S. government became aware that the Soviet Union was investing heavily in psychic research. They were doing something called psychotronic espionage, which is using like ESP to gather intelligence. So the U.S., wanting to not fall behind the Soviet Union in any way, decided that they needed to do something to address the psychic gap. The U.S. intelligence agencies decided to investigate whether remote viewing, the purported ability to see distant, unseen targets through mental means, could be of use in national security. Now, let me just clarify here. I know we talk a lot about government conspiracies on this podcast. This is not a government conspiracy theory. This is fact. These are declassified documents. This is an actual government program, and these are actual government programs that I'm going to be discussing here. So it begins in 1972. The CIA funded an exploratory program at Stanford Research Institute, and it was led by a Dr. Harold E. Puthoff, a physicist who was with the National Security Agency, and Russell Targ, who was a laser physicist and parapsychology researcher. Now, the first test subject was this person named Ingo Swann, who is an artist and a psychic from New York who claimed to have remote viewing abilities already. So in June 1973, they tested Swann, and they successfully described features of a hidden target inside a shielded Faraday cage, something that no other means could have possibly provided them access to. So the demonstration really impressed CIA officials, and in a paper that Puthoff and Targ wrote later, they said, "First, we have established that it is possible to acquire significant amounts of information about remote locations. Second, the physical distance separating the subject from the scene, even distances ranging over thousands of kilometers in recent transcontinental experiments, does not appear to lessen the accuracy of the perception. Third, the use of Faraday cage electrical shielding does not in any apparent way degrade the quality of the description obtained." Now just think about what that means for a second. That means that the US government, and presumably the Soviet government, could literally watch anybody, anywhere, doing anything at any time.
That's a lot of power.
That is a lot of power.
Yeah.
So next we move on to 1976 to 1979, Project Grill Flame. Now you may recall in the past I've referred to this entire thing as Project Stargate, but it turns out Project Stargate is just one of the programs that the U.S. government ran.
That's just like the introduction to it all, pretty much?
No, actually, that was like the closure to it.
Oh, that was the closure.
That was like the last recorded one. There's probably, Lon Strickler told us there's still more going on now. So.
Oh, boy.
But from 1976 to 1979, we've got Project Grill Flame, and the interest in remote viewing by this point had spread beyond the CIA. So the U.S. Army's Intelligence and Security Command, also known as INSCOM, and the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, joined forces to fund operational remote viewing experiments. This was Grill Flame. So at Fort Meade, Maryland, a dedicated team of remote viewers was trained to attempt psychic intelligence gathering on foreign military sites, hostages, and weapons development. Now, there were a couple notable participants. One was Joseph McGonigal, who is a U.S. Army Chief Warrant Officer, and he was one of their most successful viewers. He's gone on to have like speaking tours and books and everything else. He's kind of like the front man for talking about this project. Skip Atwater was another participant. He was an Army officer who recruited and trained remote viewers. So McGonagall actually received a Legion of Merit Award in 1984 for intelligence contributions, which many insiders believed referred to his classified work in remote viewing. So I will give you one instance of McGonagall's remote views that I found really fascinating. One of the things they say about remote viewing is it not only allows you to look across distances, but also across time. And there's an instance where McGonagall details seeing this weird alien terrain with these large 10 or 11 foot tall non-humanoids walking around. And he describes all this in vivid detail. And they reveal the site that they had told him to look at. Because when you're doing remote viewing, they don't tell you what you're looking at. They just give you coordinates. When they revealed what he was looking at, it was supposed to be Mars 1 million BC.
Oh,
So
you could go back in time yet too.
yes. So
Wow.
it was quite interesting. And there was another person who had described that exact thing. I believe it was in a comic book in like the 50s. Described that exact race of people living on Mars in the past. So it was kind of an interesting convolution of ideas there. But we move on to the 80s, and we've got Project Center Lane and Project Sunstreak. Center Lane ran from 81 to 83. Sunstreak ran from 84 to 85. During this period, the remote viewers attempted to locate hostages in Lebanon and describe Soviet missile facilities. In several declassified cases, they provided sketches that were later confirmed to be accurate when satellite imagery became available. Now we move on to Project Stargate in the 1990s. So in 91, the various strands of psychic research efforts were consolidated under one umbrella, and they called it Project Stargate. Still at Fort Meade, managed by the DIA, the CIA eventually terminated this program in 1995, prompted by growing skepticism at the end of the Cold War. They had commissioned the American Institute of Research to evaluate the project's validity. They concluded that some results were statistically significant, but remote viewing had no practical intelligence value. As a result, it was terminated, and all files were declassified under the Freedom of Information Act. This officially ended the U.S. government's remote viewing program, which had lasted over 20 years across multiple agencies. And you can view any of these things in the public record now. So that's where we're at. I will add a couple personal notes here. I mean, first of all, I should probably tell you what remote viewing is, now that you've heard what it's been used for. The actual process usually involves a handler and a viewer, and the handler is the one who knows where you're going and what you're looking for. The viewer does not. The viewer goes into like a meditative or trance-like state, and they try to find whatever is at the coordinates that they're given by the handler. And then these people have to be really good reporters. They have to not only remember what they're seeing, but be able to write it down and draw pictures of it and everything else so that their information is actually useful. The other thing I should add is that this is a practice that I've tried, and I had one really, really promising result. Because I didn't have an official handler, I guess I should have asked one of you guys to do this. I had created randomized numbers attached to various locations, because I figured if I just used coordinates, I could remember what the coordinates were subconsciously, and it would affect my viewing. So the random numbers attached to it, I focused on that number and went into a meditative state and attempted to view something. I saw a desert with really not even a cacti growing around it. It was just like a big open plateau of blowing sand and dirt, and the sun baking down on it. And I saw like a broken down fence, like a really old fence somewhere in the distance. And when I looked up the number, what I was looking at was Groom Lake. which is the area directly above Area 51 in the Nevada desert.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and mind you, I had a dozen different locations with numbers attached to them, and it ranged anywhere from like a bowling alley to the White House to, Groom Lakes Groom Lake. So, and I did specify Groom Lake, not Area 51, because I thought Area 51 might have some kind of shielding around it or something to prevent remote viewing, whereas I thought Groom Lake may not. But anyway, that was my experience. That was my most successful experience to date.
Crazy.
So, now that I have unloaded all that on you, what do you guys think of this?
Yeah. So most of those stories in the history, yeah, that's really unexplainable. But one that did raise some questions for me was the Mars, I guess, test.
Yeah.
So, I've been learning a lot about how the brain works in a deep state of whether it be sleeping or dreaming and whatnot. If this person who was astral projecting saw that comic that you're talking about, do you think it could have been possible if the brain was just trying to piece things together like it would in REM sleep?
Absolutely. I think that is a very strong possibility. I think, obviously the question becomes, how did he know to be looking at Mars?
Yeah.
But maybe subconsciously he just read that those numbers did not match any of the earthly numbers he had been given, so his mind immediately jumped to space or some other time or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a very solid possibility.
I'm wondering if he maybe saw that comic that you're talking about in the 50s. Maybe he once saw that and his mind was just like thinking about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And clearly, if it was like very, very similar in details, I don't know if that comic was based off of real sightings or if it was just like something made up. I don't know.
Yeah, nobody knows for sure. It could be that the person who wrote the comic had a dream about it or viewed it in a meditative state or something like that.
Yeah,
but
that would make it different. But if it was just a plain comic story that was made up, then I don't know.
Yeah, I do recall something about the author of that comic being like an astrophysicist or something. I don't think it was like just some dude drawing pictures. I think it was actually somebody who had some knowledge.
Then that's interesting. Yeah, that changes the whole thing.
Yeah, I'll have to look deeper into that. I seem to recall though that it wasn't, back in the 50s, not anyone could just pick up a pen and be a comic artist. It was, you had to have like credentials for whatever you were drawing about. But the other thing I should bring up, just the skeptic in me. First of all, I realize that this idea that the government is doing stuff like this is either reassuring or horrifying, depending on your point of view. And my point of view has actually changed. If I had heard about this in the 1970s or the 1980s during the Cold War, when I was, as patriotic, anti-communist as you could possibly admit, I wore a t-shirt with a picture of a B-1 bomber on it that said "Peace through superior firepower." If that gives you any idea where I was on that whole thing. I would have been, yes, we gotta stay ahead of the Ruskies with our psychic research. We're doing fantastic. That's great. I want to volunteer. But now I look at it with a little less trust of the government that I had back then, and maybe a little less us against them in my mind than I used to have. And I look at it, I'm like, that's an awful lot of power to give to your government. That's an awful lot of power to give anyone.
Yeah.
But the other thing I should mention is there's every possibility that this was all fake. I mean, part of espionage is counter-espionage, and part of the Cold War was trying to make the enemy think we were doing something that we weren't, so that they would waste their resources trying to do the same thing. So there's every possibility that there was no remote viewing experiment conducted by the government, and we falsified all those documents to make the Russians drive themselves crazy trying to further psychic experiments that didn't work.
Chaos. Pure chaos.
Yeah.
That would be a crazy plot twist, though.
Yeah. Or, the flip side, the Russians could have tried it and failed and created all these false documents to make the U.S. chase their tails and try to research psychic phenomenon that may or may not exist.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that be ironic if the Russians failed at it, threw this out there as a red herring, and then the U.S. did it and it actually worked?
I really hope that sometime in the next 100 years, that'll get answered or something, or in the next 1,000 years.
Yeah. Well, all I can tell you is I can't explain my experience with it. I mean, it could have been, some weird quirk where I just guessed right on what I was viewing. It could also, have been legit. And I know, Lon Strickler is a big believer in remote viewing. He's done it several times, and he's had a lot of success with it. Another guy who's a huge believer in it is our hero, Robert Bigelow, from Skinwalker Ranch. The man who has the craziest photographs on file, I think. If you talk to him for more than 2 minutes, he's going to get into remote viewing on you and explain just how much he's seen under Skinwalker Ranch and at various locations around the world through remote viewers who he has hired.
Yeah, I can imagine this would be a very helpful tool for the government, and I really wouldn't be surprised if they're still doing it, just not publicly announcing it.
Yeah, because remember, this was only announced, and these files became available in the 90s for stuff that had happened in the 70s. As long as they thought this was a viable project, they did not disclose any information. So if they've restarted it and they still think it's a viable project, we're not going to hear anything about it for decades.
Maybe I'll live through long enough to see that get publicized.
Yeah. Or maybe someday you'll be recruited to participate.
Maybe, yeah. I'll be the crazy scientist that says, they're doing it behind your back, and nobody will believe me.
Right, exactly. I missed an opportunity. A friend of mine actually pointed out that there was another participant in this program who was giving a lecture in New Mexico last week. And I really wish I'd heard that. And we tried our best to find out if there was going to be like a way to attend it via Zoom or to maybe get a video of it or something. But so far we've come up empty. But I really want to hear what this guy has to say. It's just a fascinating topic to me.
I wonder if there's a podcast or something on YouTube of him talking.
Maybe. And I know there are podcasts of Joseph McGonigal, and I know we've seen him before on various shows. He's especially, I think Beyond Skinwalker Ranch we saw him on once. And there was also a show about the military base in Alaska under Mount McKinley that he had apparently viewed, that he went into detail on. Yeah, I really find this stuff interesting. There is a second, next level to this.
Oh boy.
Now,
that's it.
Yeah. In addition to these remote viewing experiments, the government has also engaged in this thing called the Gateway Project, or the Gateway Experiment. This was a CIA project that involved using meditation to actually alter reality. So you're not just viewing things at that point, you are actually trying actively to change the makeup of the world, which is really horrifying. There's a lot of documentation on that, and that's something else I've been researching. So if you guys or our listeners have any interest in discussing that project, I know this is a little bit off our normal beaten path for our podcast, so if this is just a me thing, I will keep it to myself. But if anyone has any interest in hearing more about this, I would love to talk about that on some future podcasts. So just leave your comments, and positive or negative, and we will go from there. I know that's opening a can of worms.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on these wonderful or horrifying projects?
I sure hope that we'll hear more about that, because the farther you go, the more danger and power the government has. It sounds so. Hopefully, it's not true. Honestly, it's gonna be worse if it is true.
Yeah, I think it pretty much sounds horrifying. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, it sums it up well.
All right, we'll stick with horrifying then.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming along on this little side journey with me, and as always, thank you for listening, and thank you for subscribing.